Hello, this is Penny Sansbury and Amy Cornell, and this is the Book Marketing Tips and Author Success Podcast. Amy, I'm really excited about this show.
Me too.
So we came up with a fun idea. I think it's a fun idea. Can this book be saved? And we are going to start showcasing a book on our podcast, one book per show, that is sent to us, and we'll get all the guidelines out there, and you'll be able to look in the show notes and find out exactly how to do it. But basically, if you are struggling, if you feel like your book is struggling, or if you're not really sure about the cover or whatever, Can This Book Be Saved will be a quick little 10-minute end of show discussion about what could be different or what could be better or how you may want to make changes. And Amy does all of our assessments. So she particularly loves this stuff.
I do. This is where I get to geek out and give authors feedback who are sitting there waiting for the kind of feedback that we can give them, so right. I feel like it's not one of those scary things where people are unsuspecting and I get to send them an email, go, hey, I have some really great ideas for you. And then they want to slap me around for giving them more homework. So
I know it.
So I kind of have the opportunity to do this with people that are 100% like just waiting. They're like, all right, I'm going to have some marching orders soon. This is what I want.
Yeah. And we're just going to take, like I said, we're going to take a little bite out of the show and spend 10 minutes doing this and offering you some feedback. And we will be posting. If you follow us on social media, you'll soon see the image, the logo that we have for it, and the guidelines for submitting your book. So, but we're really, really excited about that. This show, speaking of geeking out, this show is Amy and I geeking out about email marketing and author newsletters, because they really can be the cornerstone to your own success. What I find interesting is that email newsletters feel a little 1980s, even though I realize that's not exactly. I still think 1980 was 20 years ago. So what do I know? But sometimes I really like, 20 years ago in 1980. But email newsletters can really, really help to grow your brand and grow your reader base. And we're going to talk a little bit about, how to increase your open rate, meaning how many people actually open up your newsletter, which I ask authors that on my intake calls with them all the time. If they have a newsletter, I will ask them what their open rate was. It's always good to know how to build more followers, how to keep your newsletter clean while you'd want to, how to do newsletter swaps, and a whole bunch more stuff. If you're not convinced that a newsletter or, email marketing in and of itself, we all get emails, right? And you think, oh my gosh, do I really want to send another email to my followers? I found these really cool statistics. I was actually putting in a chapter in Book to Bestseller on newsletter marketing. In 2019, 3.9 billion people used email, right?
Crazy.
By 2023, they expect this figure to grow to 4.3 billion for email marketing, right? And I think while we all complain about getting too much email, according to a site, and we'll list the statistics also in our show notes so y'all have them. 49% of consumers say they'd actually like to receive promotional emails from their favorite brands on a weekly basis. And in fact, according to another study, in 2019, and I want to make sure that I get this right because it's kind of staggering, for every $1 that you invest in email marketing, you can expect an average return of $42.
Whoa.
I know. It's so crazy. It's so crazy. Amy, who has been just such a trooper with our email newsletter list, I want you to take first. I want to first have you talk about newsletter services, because there's some confusion around that. And we just switched from MailChimp, to a new provider, which I know you'll talk about. But talk us through a little bit about the different services that are out there.
Right. Yeah, this is it. There's a lot. And a lot of them, I will say, offer a lot of options that I would say for most authors, you're not going to end up using all of those features. So this, they really are out there to service a lot of different industries. Maybe that's a better way to put it. So part of it also is keeping in mind like what you're really going to do. And it's not about the number of people, but what, are you really realistically sending out a newsletter and you want some data on it? Then focus on companies that really can just do that really well for a reasonable fee. And we end up, like Penny said, we end up going with Sendinblue because what really stood out to us is that they charge based on the number of email campaigns you want to send, whereas a lot of services charge based on how big your list grows. And I personally have a problem with that because I feel like from a budgeting standpoint, that discourages growth. We were getting to the point where Penny and I were like, well, maybe we should see who we could cut from our list because we're like, oh, like this bill is getting a little outrageous to send, 1 or 2 emails a month to people we want to stay in touch with. And so for what it's worth, that's why we went with Sendinblue. That was the biggest selling point, was that we could grow our list as big as we wanted. And we paid based on the amount of communications we wanted to do, which I thought made a lot more sense for what we're interested in doing. And that's why I say, I think that aligns pretty well with what a lot of authors want to do. So look for a company that focuses on charging based on the number of emails you want to send versus how big your list is would be huge. And then also Sendinblue has great templates. It's really easy to use in regards to adding elements that you want to feature. It's got great statistics on your open rate. You get some really great data back on your lists and who's using your engaging, I should say, with your communications and things like that. So I would say that's really important. So focus on the features that you really need. Definitely read reviews that are out there, and keep an eye on, just for budgeting reasons, because you don't want to get yourself into a situation where you are fighting against something that should be helping you, whether it's for budgeting reasons or just usability in general.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that one of the other things to mention is I'm a big fan of growth. I mean, obviously we wouldn't be in our 20 years in business if we weren't all about growth. Like, I love that.
I feel like we should have a little like add-in sound that has us like clinking a champagne glass whenever we talk about like the
I know, we need sound effects.
Wouldn't that be awesome to have a sound?
That would be so awesome. Oh my gosh.
I'll get after our sound manager. She's been slacking on her job.
Our sound manager. That's awesome.
And if you guys don't know who that is, then we encourage you go to amarketingexpert.com/podcast. So you can get in on the joke there. Let's not reveal it all in one spot.
Right. So you can look at our awesome production team.
Yeah.
But I will say that so if this is your first newsletter, the numbers that you get are really important. So what kind of data that you get is really, really important. But don't get too aggressive with services, and don't think, oh my gosh, I'm in a newsletter. They talked about it. I love this. Not that, like, I'm sure that if you're listening to this show, you probably already have thought about having a newsletter. We probably didn't necessarily spark that idea for you, but when I had our site redesigned, this goes back a number of years, the person who redesigned it said, oh, there's a whole new newsletter system and we're going to put it in. And it was so confusing. And it was one of those things where, like, I sat through the presentation, I thought, oh, that would be so cool to do that. But you literally need an army of people to help you do. So my point being is that, you can find a service that's going to really kind of grow with you too, because having too many of those add-ons at the beginning when you're just trying to send out a newsletter is just not really, it's more time than it's. I think, Amy, you remember the service that shall remain nameless. You remember that, don't you?
Oh yeah. No, and I will say,
and that's all she has to say about that, because we have such bad memories about it.
Well, and it's true. And let's be honest, we all have a lot to get done. Promoting a book, keeping your brand name out there as an author. This is an ongoing job for you. And so I am very anti elements that make it any more difficult or discourage you from getting involved in your own marketing.
Yeah.
And so, and I do think a lot of those, like you were saying, Penny, a lot of those add-on features and like the super fancy stuff that they can throw at you when you're first brainstorming what you're going to do, or maybe to revamp your newsletter, if that's the situation you're in right now and that's why you're listening, be careful with those because they sound fun. But then when you're actually getting in there to start putting your newsletter together and making this stuff happen and doing the follow-up, it becomes not fun really quickly. And we want you guys to stick with this because newsletters really are very beneficial in lots of ways. So don't throw a bunch of extra stuff in there that eventually is just going to turn it into something you hate.
Yeah, because we finally we divorced our relationship with the prior newsletter system, and we don't even mention the name. So that's obviously we have issues about the breakup. Amy and I do. But one of the other things that authors say to me all the time is, well, they either have a newsletter and they don't use it because they don't know what to talk about, or they don't want to do a newsletter because they don't know what they don't know what they want to talk about. Which I can completely appreciate, right? Because we used to do, our newsletter has changed over the years, but I remember, do you remember, Amy, when you first started and the newsletter was like this whole big odyssey of I had to put in, to write an article for the newsletter and to be different than the blog. Yeah. Remember that?
Yes. And I already feel like a cornered animal just making grunting noises since this episode started. I'm catching myself going, oh God, that's coming through on the mic. Like, but no, it's very true. Yeah. No, you need to be careful about that kind of stuff. But yes, our newsletter used to be quite a beast. And it was that project that nobody wanted to work on, which is the exact opposite of how you need to set yourself up to get this done and to stick with it.
Absolutely. So I vote, keep your newsletter short, and start out with it being short. Look, don't give yourself, I see some author newsletters that are just amazing. And I'm so envious. I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish that I could do a newsletter that was just so, they have an update on their writing and what's going on. Maybe they're running a contest. Maybe they have some other kind of fun thing, but find like 3 things to share in every newsletter, right? And we'll talk about how often to send a newsletter in a minute, but figure out 3 things that you want to share. And when you're ready to expand on those, like when you feel like you have your sea legs, then you can definitely expand on those. But I think that, you can have like I said, this one author did an update from her writing world. And sometimes she talked about the challenges that she faced writing. And I remember I got a newsletter recently from a fiction author, and she talked about her process last year and how much it changed with having kids home from school all the time. And, and those kinds of things really help to personalize you because remember, you are having a conversation with your reader. This isn't just about you, pushing stuff out there. You really want to create a newsletter that is engaging, but you don't have to have it. Like if you focus on just 3 topics for every newsletter, it also helps readers to expect certain things in that newsletter.
Yes, I think that's so smart. I love that model. And I love that you said that because I actually use a similar approach when I do social media coaching with our clients. Mm-hmm. When they're like, I don't know what to do on social. I feel like nobody's responding. I'm not getting any engagement. And I kind of put them through the paces of a little exercise where I ask them to focus to find 5 to 10. And this is for social, but it works exactly the same way with a newsletter with a smaller number. But find 5 to 10 things that you have in common with your ideal reader market. Yeah. Focus on things that they resonate with, that you resonate with, things that, imagine you're sitting there having a conversation with these people in real life versus putting it in your newsletter. What are those kind of commonalities that you can both connect on and get something out of? And it's a really great way to narrow down what you should focus on. And it's a great strategy for social media. So there's a fun free tip there. And then do the same thing for your newsletter. Tone it down, like Penny said. Focus on 3 things to get started. It's a lot easier to expand than it is to set that bar super high.
Oh, yeah.
And then feel like, well, I can't meet that every month. Like you don't want to go down that road. And so and I always encourage people that like both social media and newsletter, don't come up with ideas in a funnel Meaning, don't just sit there and tick off a bunch of things that you need to get done or that you need to achieve with your newsletter, because that is quickly going to become something that people stop reading.
Yeah.
You really need to balance out that push with a pull factor. So if you're pushing an upcoming book and things like that, then you really need to pull them back in by countering that with an opportunity to claim an early copy by a certain date, to be an early reader for that book or an early reviewer, or claim a free copy of an earlier book if you write a series. That's another great way to do that. So if you have something new coming out in a series, offer to help people catch up if they've missed one of the books in the series up to that point.
Yeah.
So always find that push and pull. So this is a newsletter is not just something to check off your list to get a bunch of your shit done. Excuse my language. It needs to matter. It needs to matter to the people that are reading it. And you really, for every single thing you put in there, you have to counter that with something that really, truly matters and benefits the person on the receiving end because they bothered to open it and give you that open rate.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that I would say too is that so you could test you can test different quote unquote versions of your newsletter, right? And Constant Contact did a study and found that 20 lines of text or 200 words is the perfect length for audience engagement. So as you're experimenting with different newsletter lengths, right? If you want to go longer, keep the blocks of text fairly short, because we, as we're reading, whether it's on our phones or on our tablets, whatever, on our computers, we scan, the eye tends to sort of scan. And we say this in blog posts. In fact, Amy always has to remind me for the blog posts that I write, it's like, cut your paragraphs, make them shorter. It's easier on the eye. But if you want to test different newsletter lengths, and you can also do this with subject lines too, is do A/B testing, right? So split up your newsletter list and try a longer newsletter with a different subject line, or you could just have the same subject line and see how far readers go down the newsletter rabbit hole with you, right? See how far down they scroll and make sure that there are places for them to click at the bottom of the newsletter, right? So that that they actually made it through. But the A/B testing is really, really quick and easy to do.
I love that. That's a really great point, because this is definitely an area where you need to be open to evolving based on feedback, the kind of engagement you get, things like that. And like Penny mentioned, that could mean changing up your email subject strategy, trying different variations to see what gets a bigger open rate, the kind of content you're including. We went back, we said, focus on 3 things. Maybe at some point you swap out one of those because you're like, you know what? I can make this more interesting by including this instead. And then even your overall look, we've changed the formatting on our newsletter multiple times. Like that's been something that we've tested quite a bit, that has definitely evolved even a lot more than the kind of content we include. We as just in general, we evolve with email communications and online communications. Our newsletter has evolved to kind of stay up with what is current and acceptable. And so I would say always be open to that. But the caveat with that being that you want to make sure that that's backed up by some actual data and some tracking. So it's very easy to have maybe one bad month where maybe the open rates weren't so good, and then to immediately go into like flight or fight mode, like, okay, I have to change everything. This is falling apart. It's like, don't be so drastic with it. Make sure that you are checking, you're doing all the right things. So you're testing out, adding a couple of new things here or there, or swapping out subjects, or, focusing on, adding more reader benefits, more giveaways, more promos. Like do little things to test it before you completely ditch an approach that you're taking or completely revamp it. And if you get really stuck, I would say talk to somebody. Like we do a lot of coaching with authors on newsletter stuff. When we do email coaching with our clients, newsletters often come up, actually. Brainstorming ways to improve their newsletter or to pick up where it left off, or they haven't. So this is something that is totally like acceptable. Like get a second set of eyes on your newsletter, get some feedback from somebody else, So get some, positive reinforcement, but then also get some, constructive changes that you could potentially make. Because it's really hard sometimes to make all of these decisions by yourself. You get too close to your own work.
Yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely true. And one of the things that we, when you first started working with us, we had a drip campaign on our website, and basically it dripped out marketing tips, right? And the first ones, I think they went out like every week, and then every 2 weeks, and then every 10 days or something like that. But the issue with that is that I think readers enjoyed it, although the engagement on it really dropped after the first few. But it was something that we also had to we also had to keep updated, right? We had to keep it updated a lot. And this was for our quote unquote ethical bribe / reader magnet, which I probably should have led with that. But how you gather names, put a sign up on your website. Obviously, I also encourage signups. I have a letter in the back of my book that encourages newsletter signups and things like that. But think about, and Amy, I want you to take this part of it, because I know you've seen some really, really cool ethical bribes, and talk us through kind of the odyssey that was the, oh my goodness. That was the marketing tip stuff. But I think that you really have to have a solid reason for people to want to give their email address to you. And you see this on retailers, like sometimes you'll get 10% off or 20% off or something. And then they have your email address, and it's worth that 20% discount to them, because they can kind of keep sending you new stuff. They can sending you offers and specials and things like that.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, no, I can't tell you how frustrated I get when I get to an author's website, especially an author that, hasn't hit their stride yet.
Yes.
For what that's worth. And you get to their website and their newsletter sign up is just, sign up to hear what I'm up to. Or, you know what I mean? Like, sign up to get on my email list. And I'm like, ugh, like that sounds... Yeah. Sorry, but that sounds like the exact opposite of what I need in my life right now, is to be on just another email list to see how somebody's life is going. I mean, if we're being totally honest, like our family would skim what's going on with our lives. So it's like, you can't expect complete strangers who you're also asking to spend money to invest themselves in just updates on what you're up to. So you really need to give them a reason to not only share their information, but potentially open your emails when you do send them. So I think that's very true, Penny. The best ones I see from authors, they always have something immediately that you get, not just like at some point, something cool will happen to you. It's a free download, a free book, a free resource. Right now we ended up shifting over to our monthly book marketing planner. Yes. And that has been insanely popular. And it's easy. People get it right away. You were referencing what we used to do, which was a series of marketing tips. And we did get some good feedback on them, like you said, when at the beginning, because we would actually get people replying to those email tips saying like, oh, can you clarify this? Or can you explain a little bit more about that? Which shows that they were obviously engaging with it. But it was a list of 52, right?
Yeah.
And we were noticing that the open rate started dropping off dramatically after X number of tips, because people just got overwhelmed with what they were being sent on a regular basis. Yeah. And we had to, suck it up. And it was like, well, but shouldn't they want to just do everything that we tell them to do? Like,
right.
But we did. We had to suck it up. We had to make the decision and just say, like, you know what? They are telling us that this is not working for them anymore, or at least not in the way we were doing it, at the volume we were doing it. And so we went back to the drawing board and came up with something that was quick and easy, yet still super useful. And it's been, like I said, amazingly popular. Like, we've had so many downloads for our free book marketing planner.
I was so surprised by that.
Wasn't that cool? That's one of our major success points, I think. I mean, like, we have a lot of like high points, but I will say, for what it's worth, Penny and I do a lot of brainstorming, trying to come up with content ideas, resources, just new ways to make book marketing and your author journey a little less chaotic and stressful in any way we possibly can. And it takes, we put in a lot of time to that. And so it's really, I was so proud that particular resource has done so well, because it really is very helpful. And it's nice to get that positive reinforcement and to get those downloads.
Well, so I think that, the takeaway of this obviously is that your, whatever your ethical bribe is, whatever your reader magnet is, it has to obviously matter to your reader, but it also has to be something that I think is easy to deliver. And with the 52 tips, in order to make it something that readers could actually use, Amy and I are both such a stickler about having current information. So, the tips always needed to be updated, and we were always, and the delivery of it got wonky, because when we were updating the tips, like they couldn't, we had to pause the delivery. And so it was, so create something. And you can oftentimes use a system like BookFunnel to deliver. So like, let's say, for example, if you're doing like a mini ebook or something like that, you can use BookFunnel to deliver it, or in some systems have a delivery element built into them. But find something that your reader is really going to want, that's going to encourage them to sign up for that newsletter, because that's how you build signups. And I think you can, I'm not a fan personally of buying emails, because I think they get outdated very quickly. You can buy lists and you can all of that other stuff, but I think organically growing it is really the best way to do that. And then you'll get people who will, pass it on to their friends and say, "Oh my gosh, this newsletter is so great. You have to sign up." So let's talk a little bit about the timing of the newsletter in terms of how often to send it. And I think that, the biggest piece of this is consistency. So whatever you do it on a regular basis, because you want to kind of set an expectation for your readers. And as I pointed out earlier, most readers do want to get stuff regularly. I think 49% of consumers in the same study that Constant Contact did do want to have regular communication, but that doesn't necessarily have to be weekly. So don't feel like, oh my gosh, now I have to send my newsletter every week. I mean, we send ours once a month, and actually our open rate went up since we switched it from twice monthly to once a month. So people want to hear from us, but maybe not necessarily so frequently. And I don't really take that personally. I mean, I think it's kind of like what Amy said with those tips. The interest started to drop off because people felt overwhelmed. So the other thing is too, when somebody says to me, how many times a month should I send my newsletter? Should I send it weekly, once a month, whatever? I got to tell you, it really depends. And that's why the metrics on whatever newsletter provider that you have matter so much, because you'll be able to test this. So I'm a big fan of consistency. You want to consistently send it on the same, third Tuesday of the month or whatever. But initially you're going to be experimenting, and you want those numbers to drive your decisions, because your audience is going to really tell you when and how many times they want to read it. I mean, like I thought when I was first in business, I'm like, every week, and people want marketing tips every week and every week.
Oh gosh.
But again, I know Amy is like, oh my
I almost
gosh,
fell off my chair. I had to hold on.
Yeah. I mean, readers just get overwhelmed. So it's really about knowing your audience, and you could sign up for other newsletters in your market and kind of see how often other people are sending them out.
Yeah, I think that's really smart. And I think from a very human side of this, I would suggest erring on the side of giving yourself more time in between newsletters versus jumping right out of the gate and saying, I'm going to do it twice a month, or, I'm going to do it every week, because you can always do more. You can always pleasantly surprise people. Mm-hmm. But once you set that standard that you're going to reach out and say something at a very consistent basis, but on a very tight schedule, it gets tricky. It gets really tricky, because one, you definitely don't want to get boring. And I think that is a very, very real thing. If you are sending your newsletter too often, when you don't have enough interesting things to say or offer people, they're going to get bored very quickly and you're going to get a lot of unsubscribes. And I think a great way to test out like increasing your frequency is by doing a special announcement. So if you say you're on a schedule to do a newsletter once a month, but something amazing happens that you think might really matter to your readers, you can send out a special announcement, to that same list and track your open rates for that special announcement. And you might get some really great positive feedback. It's like, oh, wow, they didn't mind hearing from me more frequently.
Right.
But I think that special announcement for really great things that are happening is a really fun way to give yourself the option to contact people more, but without establishing a newsletter schedule that forces you to do it, over and over again before you have something really interesting to say.
Right, exactly. And I think that it also matters kind of when you send your newsletter. So there are a lot of studies out there in terms of like days of the week. Tuesday, Thursday tend to be the best days, followed by Wednesday. In terms of best times, according to CoSchedule, 10 a.m. Eastern is the best time, followed by 8 p.m. East. All times are Eastern because lots of people read email in bed, which is sad, but it's just kind of the way of life. Another popular time is 2 p.m. when people are kind of looking for a break from work, or 6 a.m. for early risers. And I would say that I think depending on the day of the week that you decide to send the newsletter, but specifically the time that you send it also depends on your audience, right? So
yeah,
I think that if you have something that is, if you have quick work tips for an efficient day or something, that's something that should probably go out pretty early, right? But if you have something, because I find myself, like if I'm reading my iPad in bed and I'm looking at newsletters or I'm looking at articles, I'm looking at stuff that doesn't require a lot of brain power. I mean, I don't really know how to like, I'm not going to read a really heavy book at 8:00 at night.
No, I think that's very true. And, I'm a mom. So if your readers are predominantly moms or parents with kids, there's a good chance a lot of them aren't digging into personal email until later in the evening after kids are put to bed and they finally have a minute to sit there and just be for a while. So, and we say this a lot about understanding your market, understanding your readers. Here's just another reason that is so important. It even like reaches into your newsletter. Knowing who your readers are and what's typical for your demographic should also guide you to some degree on when your newsletter should be going out as well. Because, for me, I am not in a position to be reading newsletters at 10 a.m. It's not going to happen. Like I get to things that and when it comes to authors specifically, like these are people, I consider things that I read my me time. So my me time reading aligns with my me time in real life, which is again, after the kiddos are in bed and I just have a chance to sit there and kind of do all the things I just want to do that are strictly for my own benefit.
Right, exactly. And I think that that's something that should be, keep in mind, like if your readers are, and this is for fiction or nonfiction, if your readers are primarily moms of young children, as Amy pointed out, pick a time that's really going to fit with them, because that will also go into our next topic. That also leads to improving your open rate. So I talk to a lot of authors who say, well, I have a newsletter and nobody's really reading it. Well, it could be your subject line, which again, we'll talk about again in a second, but so every email, so Gmail and Yahoo, et cetera, all these email providers start to learn newsletters, right? They learn your interaction. And every single time that somebody interacts with your newsletter, it improves your overall score with these new email providers and with your newsletter provider. So what that means essentially is that in order to get a better open rate, I really encourage you to ask your readers a question. Now, if you have a very big newsletter list, the other side of this is that if you ask them a question, you'd better be prepared to respond to that question, because the other piece of this open rate puzzle is that you want to respond to that email, because that shows that, back and forth communication. And again, it pings services like Gmail and says, this is a domain that can be trusted, meaning, like, for example, our domain is amarketingexpert.com. So a marketing expert is not a spammer. They can be trusted. So our open rate score goes up. And these emails, emails get relegated into spam and stuff like that when your open rate is down, because that's what your email service thinks it is, if that makes sense. So you can do things like, for example, the first 5 readers to respond to this email get a prize. Make it super simple, just a simple response. For example, for our marketing, we might do something like the first 5 people to respond to this email get early access to my book, right? Let's just say it. We may not limit it to 5. We may say, like, if 50 people respond and we get a great response, we may invite all 50 people in there. But we start with a low number so that people think, oh my gosh, I have to respond to them. I have to respond to this to get the special offer. But then you have to write back every single time, even if it's just to say, thank you so much for responding to this offer, et cetera, et cetera. If you're putting together your newsletter as you're starting to kind of think of your things, right, that you want to include, make sure that you're including actions. So one of those might be get them to respond, right? The other might be encouraging them to click on a link for something, again, that they actually want. Like, if your first book has been out for a number of years and you think, well, probably most people have read it, right?
Yeah.
You can certainly include links to your books, but that may not get the highest click rate, right? So find something else that can get them to kind of click over, maybe entering a contest or something like that. I had an author who did this, and this was a pretty cool idea. So she runs a newsletter. And then at the bottom of the newsletter, every single newsletter, she gives away $5 gift cards. And she picks 4 newsletter subscribers at random. And they get put into the bottom of the newsletter. And she teases it at the top. So in the intro, she says, hey, don't forget to check at the bottom. It forces people both to scroll down all the way to the bottom. And she had, like, here's this month's prize pack or something. So that was a link that they clicked to go over to that prize pack. And she gave people a window of time to respond. So she said, okay, the newsletter goes out on Tuesday. You have until Saturday morning, 8 a.m. to respond to get your prize. Otherwise, the prize goes back into the prize vault and it goes out in the next newsletter, right? And, a lot of people responded as she started to train her readers, but it was a really great way both to include a clickable link and to encourage people to scroll through her newsletter to get them to read the content.
Yes. Yeah, I think those clicks are really important. And you always have to be thinking of ways to work those in. You can see people, and this is kind of a great way to get, double bang for your buck. If you are on social and you've had a particular, Penny posts a lot of great humor content that get a lot of play. And so calling attention to those again, like when you've really gotten a great social post, especially if it's something timely that's going on in the world or anything like that a lot of people can resonate with.
Yeah.
That's great to mention because that's a great click. And then you also have people checking out your social. So you're getting a lot from that. You could, mention that, oh my gosh, this social post I did is doing it. A lot of people have responded with great comments. If you haven't commented, check it out. It's some of the responses are hilarious. Encourage them to go read some of the commentary that's happened already. You definitely want to work in any other blogs that have featured your book. And this is another one of those twofold, because then you're also giving the blog some love too. And they love getting traffic sent their way. So play nice. Think of ways to create click-throughs where you can also play nice.
So those are some really, really good ideas, Amy. I like that so much. And I think that the clicks and interactions obviously also help to improve your stats. Speaking of which, this is something that you and I have had numerous conversations on. Keeping lists clean. Do you want to take the first part of that? Because I know you are really diligent about keeping our list clean.
Yes, we had a major issue with this. I will say, Penny, we were dealing with our stats were just dropping. It was really stressful too, because we're like, okay, is it our content? Is it this or that? And you can really go down a dangerous rabbit hole trying to problem solve. But if your lists aren't clean and you've got a bunch of people on there that are just not interested in engaging with you, never will be, that shouldn't be on there, they really drag down your statistics and really skew any sort of problem solving you could potentially do, or even improvements you can make to what you're sending out in your newsletter and things like that. So that is a super important element. Yes, it feels, and I remember we had this conversation because it feels good to think, I've got 5,000 people on my list. Like, I am killing it. Like, all these people love me. And I remember when we had this conversation, I was like, yeah. And our list was actually way bigger than that. It was massive. Yeah, and I remember when we had the conversation, I was like, oh no, I have to tell Penny that half of these people need to go. And it was tough because like, oh my gosh, it sounds like such a big blow. But, we get, us personally, like, we get a lot of people from one-off conferences. Like, there's so many different ways that we get people signed up for our stuff that are just realistically not going to be with us for the long haul. And that just makes sense. But anyway, so it is important to keep those clean. Almost every email platform that you could potentially use will have tools for you to analyze your list. So it'll tell you, like, all the way down to how many of your emails an individual person has actually opened in the last 6 months, in the last 6 years, out of the last 5 emails that you sent. So really get smart about doing regular evaluations of your list. I would say a couple times a year. You don't want to do it too often because obviously people get busy. Obviously 2020 was a crazy year for a lot of people. So that would be a weird year to base like your do all end all on your newsletter on. But do it once or twice a year and just keep an eye on how your engagement is and shuffling people out that just continue to not engage with you, because you don't want to take their lack of feedback really into consideration for what you do going forward. Those just aren't your people. So they should go.
Well, and what's interesting is that I've started getting emails from people where I'm on newsletter lists, and they will legit ask me and say, I know we can tell that you haven't opened up our newsletter in a while. Are you still interested in hearing from us? Mm-hmm. And part of the reason that they're doing that, because I think the biggest issue around having a clean list is not just because, like, I'm just gonna put this number out there. I think we had 30,000 people on our list at one point. I mean, we had a massive number on our list.
It was huge.
It was huge. And it was great. And it was certainly, it was boast. We're like, oh, we have 30,000 people. But the problem with that is that you're paying for people who are not, some of the email accounts were even completely inactive, and people move and people stop writing book or whatever, right? Or maybe we just weren't that interesting. But having a newsletter list that has a bunch of emails on there or people on there that are not engaging with or opening your newsletter to read it impacts your overall open rate score. Yes. So if you have a list that say is 30% inactive, it can impact email systems like Gmail, et cetera, because these email systems, again, somehow it's really weird and it feels very big brother, but these emails all grade based on the interaction with, your newsletter. And even Gmail has gotten so sophisticated now that when my personal Gmail account, if I have newsletters that I haven't opened in a while, it will ask me, are you sure you still want this? So really keeping that list clean and going back to some of our earlier tips of finding ways to get folks to engage with you on a fairly regular basis will also help you to build more, to build your newsletter into more of a tool as opposed to just something that you do once or twice a month. So let's talk about newsletter swaps, because I love newsletter swaps as appropriate. And it can really be fun to promote your newsletter to similar readers. Amy, do you want to, I know you have strong feelings about this because you have a lot of really great authors that you follow too.
I do. Yeah. And I think that's one thing also that we talk about collaboration, and rightly so, Penny, I think that has to be probably one of the toughest things that we ask authors to try to work into their marketing plan, is that collaborative effort, because it just seems so in your face and you're asking a lot of somebody else. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of pieces to it that I think a lot of authors are just they shy away from a little bit.
Yeah.
But that collaborative effort is really so important. And it's something that not enough authors are doing, which automatically means that you are going to stand out if you start doing it. And Goodreads is a great platform for meeting and getting to know other authors in your genre. So if you don't already belong to an organization, or you don't participate in events for your genre or anything like that yet, notice the yet, because we encourage you to do these things.
Right.
But if you're not doing that yet, get on Goodreads, because it's easy to find authors and connect with them, message them, things like that. It's easy to check out their books. It's such a great platform, honestly, for getting a really good feel for what that author is about and what they put out there, how many followers they have, what kind of engagement they get, things like that. And connect with these authors and talk about doing some cross promotion on your newsletter. Sign up for their newsletter. Once you start finding a few people like they seem like a good fit for me, start following their newsletter, get their newsletter, but make a point to make those connections and present them with ideas for ways that you can help each other out. And again, going back to repeating, you have to make it worth the recipient's while on both sides. So plan strategically to do it when, hey, will you promote my next limited time ebook discount promo and I will do yours? Or would you mind putting a blurb in there for my next release and I will do one for you? So this kind of tit for tat, but also making sure that if you're going to do something like that, make it a big enough deal that everybody benefits. So even the recipients on the other end that have shared their contact information, you want that other author's recipients to go, oh, that's kind of cool. Like this is a genre I like. This is an author I haven't heard of yet. And their book is only $2.99 for a few days. I'm going to check it out because I trust that if this author is telling me about it, it's probably a decent recommendation. And those are just gold. Those kind of personal recommendations really go very far in regards to confirming or converting more interested potential buyers into actual purchasers of your book.
Right, exactly. And I will say, and as you pointed out, the one guideline that you want to be very careful about with newsletter swaps, and it's worth emphasizing a second time, make sure that you are going after an author who is in the same genre. Right.
Yes.
So that's one of the big things. So if you have a cozy mystery book, don't pitch a mystery author because there's usually not a lot of crossover with people who like, thrillers or hard-boiled mysteries and cozy mysteries. It's a whole different market. So just be clear if you have with nonfiction, there's a little bit more wiggle room, but with fiction, you really have to make sure that if you're doing newsletter swaps, that you're staying aligned with your market, because one of the things that can happen is you wind up getting, because if somebody who is like, if there's a thriller writer, just to stay with the thriller mystery example, and he has an avid newsletter following and he decides, sure, I'll promote this cozy mystery in my, his readers, just by assumption, are going to take a look at this book and think, well, if he likes it, then I'll probably like it. And I bet it's really good. And then they get the book and they're like, oh, this is cozy. This is weird. I don't really read this genre. And you could wind up getting a bad review because of it. So just be kind of careful with that. And I know in a separate mini-sode, we're going to talk about bad reviews on Amazon, which is always a hot button for authors. So we don't want to poke the bear if you don't have to. This has been such a fun show, Amy. Thank you so much for your input, and I hope that y'all learned a lot. And as we mentioned at the top of the show, we are going to be doing a Can This Book Be Saved? So be on the lookout for that. And we will update the show notes as we finalize the instructions, because Amy and I always come up with ideas and then we come up with a way to execute them. So we're like, this is a great idea. Well, how are we going to roll that out? So that will get updated in the show notes. Once again, we love a review. Here's a fun thing that you can do is leave a takeaway in the review of what you learned or one thing that you're going to implement. And please remember to incorporate that in your review wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you so much for tuning in. Bye-bye.